inspired within me the ambition to become wife of a Caesar. So, Vespasian began the campaign against the uprising Jews. He then returned to Rome, was successfully crowned Caesar, and rightly took his place among the gods. It was then Titus who waged battle after battle, demolishing the Jewish rebellion completely and declaring himself the son of a god. Jews refused to worship him, Titus razed the Temple of Jerusalem. He succeeded in capturing their Messiah, Eleazar, and he had him crucified. Thereafter, I began living in the Roman palace, working closely with both Vespasian and Titus, and the greatest intellectuals and scientists of all of Rome, some of which were Jews. We sought to come up with a plan that would once and for all keep the Jews of Judea pacified, ensuring that they remain obedient Roman citizens. It was then that my knowledge of the typology used in Jewish literature would become useful. Together with the great scholar Pliny the Elder, we conspired to create the story of a pacifistic Jewish Messiah who had already come, and who taught the Jews to turn the other cheek and give to Caesar what is Caesar's. We used this Jewish typology, a type of symbolism, to construct the life of this Messiah out of the events of each of Titus's battle campaigns, thereby memorializing Titus as the true savior of Rome for all posterity, and convincing the whole world to embrace Caesar's Messiah.
So he called a council to unify the church.
The Council at Nicea is the first time you bring all of the bishops together and have them start to talk to each other.
The Council marks the first meeting of senior church leaders, the foundation of the Pope's College of Cardinals today.
The bishops were commissioned to write what a Christian should believe.
Constantine manages to get the bishops to agree on one singular statement of faith, still used to unify Christians today: the Nicene Creed.
The creed says, we believe in Jesus Christ, the Father Almighty, maker of heaven and earth, and the council decides that Jesus is fully human and fully divine.
Constantine declared, if you sign it, you're a Christian and you're part of us. And if you don't, you're excommunicated, you're out. You'll probably go to hell. So this became the battling cry for Catholics throughout the world.
With the Church unified after Nicea, Constantine looks to further stabilize the religious foundation of his empire. He establishes a second hub of church power in the East. He names the new capital after himself and calls it Constantinople.
There's a bit of back and forth between Rome and Constantinople.
The Christians in the East tend to look at the Christians in the West as just being barbarian. They would say that the Catholics in the West baptized their children in wolf saliva. The Westerners tend to look at the East as being not strong, effete.
The hierarchy of clergy under bishops who reported to the Bishop of Rome had been working well. But now, with Constantinople acting as a second capital, there is a second bishop who believes that he should be in charge.
There were disputes between the Bishop of Rome, the Bishop of Constantinople. Each one saw himself as a very powerful leader, and each one was competing with the others for authority.
Despite Constantine's best efforts to unify his empire under one church, the East and West remain at odds. 7 years after the Council of Nicea, Constantine dies, leaving the church still divided and Rome without a strong military leader. For over 100 years following Constantine's death, Rome is under attack from pagan barbarians to the north. After a series of invasions and bloody clashes, the barbarians overthrow the last emperor of Rome. The Eternal City, once home to 2 million people, is reduced to less than 30,000. Once the political and spiritual center of the empire.
So the same thing that happened in America, where my father's from, and in Hawaii, where my mother's from. Millions of people was reduced to thousands of people, and then other people groups came in and started living in the areas, taking up the space, living in a mixed nation now, like how France was right before the French Revolution, like how Babylon was, like how Rome was, like how America is today.
Rome is now almost abandoned and stays that way for nearly 200 years.
Rome in the 6th century was muddier and messier and perhaps less efficiently governed than it had been in the time of Constantine.
You see how when the brown man, the Afro man, so-called black man rules, there's more peace, there's more food, it's a better quality of life. Then the barbarian rules, and the known food shortages, the terraforming, destroying the land.
Rome is not a good place to live. It's very dangerous. The standard of living is very low.
Rome was virtually gone. The church's center was in Constantinople.
You see how, like today, the Europeans been ruling for only 125 years, and Hawaii is just riddled with crime, drugs, inequality, homelessness, insufficient food shortages. Same thing, that's what they do.
As Rome falls and Constantinople flourishes, much of the church's terminology becomes Greek instead of Latin. The Bishop of Rome begins to be referred to with the Greek word for father, papas, or pope. During this period of barbarian invasions, there is no centralized government left in Rome. The church is the only institution capable of addressing the needs of its suffering community.
This is a time when the Pope is not just the head of the church, he's also the ruler of Rome.
The people of Rome were enormously dependent on the church as a state. So not as a church that oversaw the relationship between God and man, but as a church that oversaw food, water, safety.
But powerful pagan families looking to control the fallen city see an opportunity. With no official means of protection, the papacy is about to come under direct.
Now, if you research the barbarians that moved into Europe became the countries that we know today, we think that white people ruled these countries, but in Europe, actuality, they came in as barbarians and overthrew and became the countries we know of them today. So there was 10 families, the barbarians, the Alemanni or something, Alemanni, the Lombards, the Franks, all these different peoples were barbarian tribes who overthrew these countries we know as European.
Attack. By 795, pagan barbarian families have been battling for control of Rome for almost 2 centuries. And the papacy is all that stands in their way.
The Lombards are one of the barbarian invaders of the Italian peninsula. They seek to conquer Rome and take over the territory that's being ruled by the papacy.
During an Easter procession, the Lombards viciously attack Pope Leo III.
Their faction wrestles into...
You see how they're trying to get rid of the Edomite popes, right? It just showed you that Edom is Rome. Edom is black Rome, right? You look at this is black Germany, black Roman, the Holy Roman Empire, right? Remember? This is part of it, right? This is governor of Sicily, right? We just saw the Lombards in Sicily trying to conquer Sicily, right? This is a governor of Sicily. So this would be the governor that would be protecting the Pope. And they tried to kill the Pope, remember? Now look, keep going down. Black Knights, look. Roman and Holy Roman Empire, the nobleman, so chief or monarch. Look at his decked out. Look. This is why they have the circles around to show the way the light shines off our afros. See.
And cut off his tongue, but he lives through it.
Pope Leo III realizes that he needs protection, and with no army of his own, he must make an alliance. He chooses the most powerful king in the Western Empire, Charles the Great of France, better known as Charlemagne. On Christmas Day in the year 800, Pope Leo III calls Charlemagne to Rome, where he crowns him Holy Roman Emperor.
Charlemagne took on himself the role of defender of the faith.
The moment that Leo III crowns Charlemagne is really important because what it does, it puts the church back together with the empire. If you have the Pope crowning a king, that means the Pope is giving that earthly king temporal and divine power.
Pope Leo III's decision to crown Charlemagne as Holy Roman Emperor marks the papacy's conscious pivot away from the Eastern Church.
The relations between Rome and Eastern Christians had not been good for a while.
Charlemagne, in his view, he was now the only legitimate Christian emperor left. As he grew in power, developed a very standoffish relationship with the ruler of Constantinople.
And that really is the start of the schism between the Orthodox Church and the Catholic Church.
In the 2 centuries after Charlemagne and Pope Leo III unite Western Europe under the papacy in Rome, the eastern part of the empire breaks off and begins to call itself the Greek Orthodox Church under the Patriarch in Constantinople.
The word Catholic originally meant universal. Until the 11th century, there was just the one church. It wasn't until the church at Constantinople broke off from its allegiance to the Pope that we begin to see references to the Roman Catholic Church as no longer meaning universal, but meaning the church which is centered at Rome.
"200 years after the historic alliance between Charlemagne and Pope Leo III, Pope Urban II rules the Western Empire from Rome, and the Patriarch reigns over the East from Constantinople, until Constantinople finds itself facing an imminent threat.
Islam is the superpower of the medieval period. They're the wealthiest, the most sophisticated. If I was betting at the time, I would have certainly bet that Islam and the Islamic empires were the way of the future.
Muslim armies have been steadily making their way through the Arabian Peninsula, conquering new lands and uniting them under Islam. They had long since conquered Jerusalem and were headed for the next Christian stronghold.
Muslims had swept through what we would now say is modern Turkey, and really getting fairly close to Constantinople itself.
When you can almost see Muslims across the water, it's time to find the Christians who are left to help you.
Emperor Alexius I of Constantinople writes to Pope Urban II in Rome, pleading for aid against the Muslims.
Alexios is asking a few hundred knights to help him defend his city. What he gets is something entirely different. Urban II is in part responding to an appeal from the Emperor Alexios. As the leader of the church, he's looking to improve the spiritual well-being of his people, but he's also a politician.
Seeing an opportunity to unite Eastern and Western Christians and solidify his place as their leader, Pope Urban II calls an emergency gathering of clergy, knights, and townspeople.
It was probably the most famous speech made during the Middle Ages. Urban told about the plight of Christians in the East who had had their lands conquered, horrible mutilations of nuns and clergy and pilgrims because of their faith. And what Urban did was very clever. Rather than just ask them to go and fight for the East, he also asked them to go all the way to Jerusalem to restore the lands that had been taken by Muslims.
The response is amazing. People shout, "Deus vult, God wills it." And this is the moment that crusading begins across Western Europe.
Pope Urban was an example of a new kind of pope. Austere, powerful personality, the papacy as a self-consciously rallying, purifying, inspiring force, calling on people to do something extraordinary for God. And it had enormous imaginative power.
For the first time, the Pope, a religious leader, once at the mercy of barbarians and dependent upon kings for protection, raises an army and commands a war. In 1094, the Eastern Church calls upon the Pope in the West to help them fight off the incoming Muslim armies. Pope Urban II sees this as an opportunity to reunite Christians and restore the reign of the Roman Catholic Church.
There's a tribal aspect to it, that our tribe is being attacked, just as we still do today. 9/11, someone attacks the United States, people are lined up at induction centers to go off and fight.
When he calls for the First Crusade, Pope Urban II solidifies his role as a world power. The Pope is no longer just a spiritual guide, but a commander at the helm of an army. A zealous fleet of nearly 40,000 starts the long march east towards Jerusalem.
The Crusades were, first and foremost, an act of piety. The Crusades are the only case I know of in human history in which you have thousands of warriors marching thousands of miles deep into enemy territory for no good strategic reason.
The warriors begin their crusade through the Rhineland in what will become modern-day Germany. The destruction in the name of Christ is waged against all non-believers in their path.
One of the terrible things that this group does is that they attack the Jews of the Rhineland. They decide that the Jews are the people who are responsible for the killing of Christ, and that if they are going to act against the enemies of the church, they will do so at home before they do so abroad.
The Rhineland massacres are only the beginning of what will become a century of religious warfare at the command of the Pope.
Once the First Crusade gets into Asia Minor, it's into Muslim-held territory. The Crusaders managed to capture the town of Nicea, and then they fight a great battle against the Muslims, and they capture Antioch.
Emboldened by their string of unlikely victories, the Crusaders are now convinced beyond all doubt that God is on their side, as they prepare to deliver the crown jewel of Christianity back to their Pope, Jerusalem.
Their Lord, Jesus Christ, had had his lands taken, and it was the Crusaders' responsibility, therefore, as his servants, to come to his aid to restore those lands.
The Crusaders were extremely violent. They would attack people in their homes. They were mass rapes, killing of children. They would set fire to entire residential neighborhoods. It was horrible.
They succeeded in liberating the city of Jerusalem from the hands of the Muslims. And this, for generations, will be hailed and recognized.
After 400 years as a Muslim temple, the Crusaders replaced the crescent atop the sacred Dome of the Rock with a cross and turned it into a church.
Partly motivated by religious zeal, partly motivated by simple desire for conquest. The Crusaders were exclusionary. Muslims were not allowed to live in Christian areas.
Jerusalem remains in Christian hands until 1187, when Saladin, the hero of Islam, draws together the Muslim Near East to recover the Holy Land.
As the Muslims close in on Jerusalem once again, Pope Urban III realizes that in his predecessor's quest to defend Christianity, he may have invited its demise.
The Pope really has to walk a tight wire when he comes through the Holy Land. You have Judaism, Christianity, and Islam. Massive faiths basically living on top of each other here.
In 2014, Pope Francis attempts to unify three major religions, in spite of the centuries of holy war that has divided them. Pope Urban II called for violence in the name of one world under one Catholic Church. And Pope Francis is still working to heal the wounds his predecessor inflicted almost 1,000 years earlier.
Religion produces such varied emotions. There is tragedy, there are crimes. It's a story of 2,000 years of such things. And the popes have been part of that story right from the start.
In 1187, after only 88 years under Christian rule, Saladin's Muslim army defeats the Crusaders and reclaims the Holy Land for Islam.
When Saladin recovers Jerusalem in 1187, Some of his people suggest they should destroy the Holy Sepulchre. It is Christ's tomb. And he says, no, let's let it survive. Saladin is a man very much aware of the power of mercy.
His rule was very different from that of the Crusaders. Saladin was motivated by his belief that Christians, Jews, and Muslims can and should be able to live peacefully.
As a symbol of a new partnership between Christianity and Islam, Saladin entrusts the key to the Church of the Holy Sepulchre to a Muslim family. Even today, it's a Muslim's responsibility to let Christian worshippers in and out of the holiest church in Christendom. Pope Urban.
You see, they've always been united. They've always, they've had skirmishes. They've always had been together. Look at this, it goes that the Tartars, which is about the year 1228, the command of Genghis Khan overspread the earth like a deluge, were the successors of the 10 tribes of Israel, which were carried into captivity to Assyria by Shalmaneser. The name Tartary, or rather Tartaria, seems to be some testimony thereof, because it signifies in the Syrian or Hebrew tongue remnants or remainders, and seemingly because these Tartarians are remainders of the forementioned tribes, nay, the northern Tartar herdsmen preserve to this day the names Dan, Zebulun, and Naphtali. Wherefore we need not to admire why so many Jews are found in Russia, Sarmatia, and Leafland. Nay, the nearer of to Tartary, the more Jews there are. Circumcision had a long time been observed among them. Before Muhammad brought his new law, it seems that Muhammad ordered the circumcision and other laws, according to Moses, to be observed by the northern people, because that in his time they began to rebel, that so they might be better kept in awe in their new religion. You see how in 1228 it's calling it a new religion, and they're trying to keep them from rebelling. And this one what we're watching right now is from the 11, almost 1200. So it's only 50 years before we just started to capture them in this.
And the third is forced to surrender the notion that Christianity must rule the world and negotiate new relationships with other faiths.
The recognition that it's a Christian space that has to be protected by its Muslim rulers, not in the sense of actually preventing people from coming in, but protecting Christians' rights to worship.
Contractual agreements, Psalms 83.
Opening and closing the doors to the holiest Christian site in Jerusalem has been the responsibility of the Al-Husseini man for 8 centuries.
I am the custodian of the Holy Sepulchre Church. We are protecting the church since 1187 until now.
Saladin's gesture has come to symbolize much of what the modern papacy represents. Divine leadership in the face of warring religions.
When I came every morning to opening the church, standing in front of the gate, I see my father and I see my grandfather and I see also Salahuddin Ayyubi waiting to open the church. This is an honor. There is no word to explain how it's amazing.
Today, over 1,000 years after the First Crusade, the Temple Mount area of the old city of Jerusalem is still one of the most contested places on earth. A fragile peace holds, and the site seeks to become a shining example of 3 different belief systems' ability to coexist.
It is the holy place for everyone. You have the Dome of the Rock, and you have the Wailing Wall, and we have the Holy Sepulchre Church. We are looking for peace. We want to live together here like brothers.
Throughout history, the Pope has played an integral role in the ongoing clash of the divide. Thousands of years passed, millions of lives lost. But calls to battle and prayers for peace still endure.
Human beings constantly face the challenge of trying to live in peace and harmony with people different from them. We've seen this throughout history.
The worlds of Urban II and Francis.
What's inside this building? This is the Dome of the Rock. The only thing inside this building is a rock. A rock that has come to me that is exactly a copy of the Western United States. As you can see, by the end of this video, I know right now you're thinking, that's crazy, that's ridiculous. But by the end of this video, you're going to be able to see absolutely that not only does it look like it, shaped like it, the topography on it is even exactly the same. So stick with me here as I go through some different maps and show you exactly what you're looking at. This is the map showing you that the BLM, U.S. government, federal government, has purchased up 90% of the western United States. The exact states that the Rock of the Dome cover. This is a map showing you the ownership, federal, state, local. The dark green on the left shows you that all the forests in the western United States are owned by the federal government through the Bureau of Land Management. We've all heard about the ranchers having battles, losing their farms and ranches, being taken. And there's a reason why they're being taken. And there's a reason why the map, that rock in the dome, is a copy, an exact match of the western United States. Islam believes that that rock represents the holiest place in the world. This map shows